Dr. Misner, great to have you join me on the Order of Man podcast. I've really been looking forward to this conversation.
Hey, it's truly my pleasure, and please call me Ivan.
Will do. Will do. I just want to make sure I respect you because you're somebody I actually think really highly of. I don't know whether you know this or not. I was part of BNI for, I want to say, just about 6 years. And I actually attribute a lot of the success that I had in my financial planning practice to my involvement in BNI. So this is a real treat for me.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, I think networking is something that, I think it's probably one of the single greatest skill sets that somebody could possess if they want to be successful. And yet, I think it's one of the most often overlooked. Would you agree with that?
No question about it. And part of the reason is that we don't teach this in colleges and universities anywhere in the world. It's not in the curriculum. I mean, I taught for 16 years at a state university, and we don't teach this. And I find it very frustrating. I did a survey years ago of 12,000 business people that was part of a book that I did. And one of the questions we asked was, has networking played a role in your success? 91.4% of the respondents said yes. When have you ever seen 91% of any group of people agree to anything ever?
Well, and I would imagine the 9% just didn't acknowledge the fact that networking was a huge part of their success.
And that's quite possible. But to me, it's just mind-boggling that such a large percentage of business people say that networking is important, and yet we don't teach it in colleges and universities. It's crazy.
Why do you think that is? I think, from my
I have
perspective,
a different opinion.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. And my opinion, I'll say my opinion, and you can either corroborate that or disagree, or we can expand on this a little bit. I think generally, when we hear the word networking, we get a little queasy. We get this like slimy feeling a little bit. I've never felt that way, but I know that seems to be something that a lot of people deal with.
Yeah, so I want to come back to that because that's an important point. But I tell you, the reason I don't think we teach it is the same reason we don't teach sales in college. We don't teach closing techniques, how to make a sale. It's not taught in college. We give kids bachelor's degrees in marketing and they don't know how to sell. And I'll tell you why. Because so hopefully professors are not listening to your podcast because they won't like my answer here. My experience, having taught for 16 years, and then I was on the board of trustees for a university. So I was at the teaching level, and I was at the level where the president reported to us. And what I discovered was that all courses at virtually all universities, other than maybe for-profit universities, all courses are controlled by the full-time tenured faculty.
Sure.
Only the full-time tenured professors can create a course. Even the president of a university can't create a course. They can recommend it, they can fund something, but only the professors can create it. So here's my theory. Most full-time tenured professors in business, not the adjuncts, but the full-time tenured professors in business have never had a real job in their life. All they do is teach. So they're teaching us how to run a business, having never run a business. And so that's why they don't teach sales, and that's why they don't teach networking, because heaven forbid that you get your hands dirty and make a sale. I think that's the reason why it's not taught.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. And what's interesting about that too is that even these college professors, let's just assume for the sake of argument that's true for a minute. Even these college professors had to tap into some network that they had to even get their position in the first place. I don't think they'd be in that position if they didn't have some ability to market themselves to other people who could potentially give them opportunities.
Yeah, but I had a dean of a business school say to me, it's a soft science. They don't teach it in business school, which is BS, by the way. They do teach soft science. They teach leadership, and leadership's a total soft science. I studied under Dr. Warren Bennis, who was the world's leading expert on leadership years ago. That mantle has been taken by John Maxwell, who's a friend. And, I'm sure they would both say it's a soft science. I know Bennis said it was a soft science. And so they do teach soft sciences, but they just choose not to teach networking. Now, let's go back to your original comment that people feel, that it's slimy.
Sure.
I agree. There are people that feel that way, but they're doing it wrong.
Yes.
So years ago, I did a keynote presentation in an all-day event. There were 900 people. And for some reason, Ryan, and I'm not quite sure why, but it just hit me because I saw people networking in between, the speakers. And I said, how many of you here, just out of curiosity, hoping to, maybe just possibly sell something today? Right? 900 people raised their hands. The whole room raised their hands. I said, great. Second question. How many of you are here today hoping to, maybe just possibly buy something? No one
Zero.
raised their hand. Not one single person. So this is what I call the networking disconnect. People show up at networking events wanting to sell, but nobody's there to buy.
Right.
And when that happens, you feel like you've been slimed because everyone's trying to sell to you. And you want to go home and get a shower. So that's not what networking should be about. I believe networking should be about working your way through the VCP process. VCP stands for visibility, credibility, profitability. First, you have to be visible in the community. People have to know who you are and what you do. Then you have to establish credibility where they know who you are, they know what you do, they know you're good at it. And in the financial services business, man, that takes time.
Definitely.
Before people trust you enough to refer a friend to invest their retirement income or to invest for life, you got to have a lot of credibility. Now, for a florist, the credibility is quicker. And
that's not to diminish what a florist does or a flooring specialist or anything. It's not to diminish any of that. It's just a different tier of trust required.
It's what I call the time confidence curve. So the time confidence curve is quicker for a florist than it is for a financial planner. It's quicker for a printer than a financial planner. So the thing is, the more expensive the ticket item, the longer the trust ratio is. It takes longer to create credibility. Right. So you can buy a thing of flowers pretty quick. Doesn't cost a lot of money. You can get credibility pretty quick. But for financial planning, it takes even longer. So what happens is you got to go from visibility to credibility. And that varies depending on the profession. And then and only then can you get to the highest level of profitability, where people know who you are, they know what you do, they know you're good at it, and they're willing to refer you because you're credible to them. And that takes time. So the answer to the question of, why go to networking events if I can't sell? The answer is to work your way through the VCP process. That's why you go through networking events.
That's really valuable because I served as a chapter vice president, a chapter president for years. And what I saw a lot of is a lot of people come in and they saw the dollar signs, right? They saw 30 people who could potentially refer individuals to them. And that's all they saw. And that was purely their motive, which is counter to the actual motto of BNI. And I'm sure we'll get into that. And it didn't work for them. And then they thought BNI was the problem. Like, no. Yeah. BNI is not the problem. Networking is not the problem. Your approach to it is the problem.
Yeah, if you're using networking as a face-to-face cold calling opportunity, you're doing it wrong. And it won't go over well, and you won't get the results that you hope. And just as you said, and you don't know why. It's kind of like a gym membership. If you join the gym, but you don't follow the exercise routine, or you don't show up, it's not going to work for you. And then you say, well, the gym never really worked for me. Or a weight loss program. If you don't follow the weight loss program, and then you say, well, that weight loss program didn't work for me. The weight loss program works fine. I've seen most of them. I've written a health book. I know what it involves. And the truth is, most of them that aren't really crazy stuff work. You just have to do it. And that's where it falls apart. A lot of what I teach is simple. It's just not easy. If it were easy, everyone would do it. Everyone would be successful. It's simple, but not easy.
I would push back on that a little bit, because in my experience, and I do this now for a living. I mean, I consider myself a marketer, a networker, somebody who can formulate and make connections. That's how you and I got introduced. So this is an integral part of what I'm doing. It's not even that hard. It's simple and it's easy. It just takes time. And I don't think a lot of people are willing to put forth as much time as it takes to build the kind of credibility and profitability that they would ultimately like to experience.
Yeah, so I accept your pushback because it's not complicated, difficult. It is hard work. I mean, but but it's a lot easier than cold calling.
Oh,
It's
definitely.
fun, it's interesting. From that perspective, it's much easier. But the thing is, it's like I played football in high school, and it's the wind sprints. It's every day you got to get out there and do your wind sprints when you're in football, or you got to do your conditioning exercises. And networking requires conditioning exercises. You got to work it. And so you can't just join an organization and expect referrals to fall from the ceiling. It doesn't happen that way.
It's funny because I've got a fitness coach, Josiah Novak, that I work with, and the other day I messaged him. I'm like, these exercises you have me doing are stupid, and they were the warm ups. I'm like, these are stupid. Why are we doing these? And he came back like a true coach would, and he said, no, they're not stupid. They may seem like that, but they're part of the equation. They have to be done because. And then he went on to explain what it is they're doing and why they're relevant. And I still
Yeah.
struggle with it. I'm not going to say now it's easy. I still struggle with it, but I see the value in it. You talk about conditioning exercises when it comes to networking. Are there some specifics that you're referring to that we might be able to incorporate in our lives?
Yeah. So, well, right now, because of COVID, everything is online. And I don't know if you know
Sure.
this, Ryan, but we switched. We had 9,600 BNI groups that met every week in person.
Mm,
So, transitioning was obviously a challenge, but we flipped successfully all 9,600 groups to online.
really? I
So
didn't know that.
they're all meeting online. And as a matter of fact, we've had chapters open online. We're now at 9,700. We were at 9,600 and some. We're now at 9,700. They
Wow.
all meet online right now. We do plan on going back to in-person meetings, but they all meet online right now. So I used to say, have you ever gotten a haircut over the phone? That would
Or
be one
not.
of the exercises. You got to show
Right.
up. So, in person or online, you got to show up. If you don't show up, there is a direct and dramatic linear correlation between attending meetings and getting referrals.
Mm,
People who attend the networking meetings, the organizations they belong to, a direct correlation between attendance and referrals. The more you attend, the more referrals you get. Here's another one that's direct correlation: one-to-ones. So we have some hard data on this, that people who sit down and do a formal one-to-one, not just, hey, how you doing, man? I'm doing good. A real formal one-to-one. Tell me more about your business so that I can refer you better. Let me tell you about my business so I can refer you. You may remember our gains exchange that we use, the
yep.
goal,
Absolutely.
that kind of thing. So we found that people who do one or less a month, one-to-one, compared to people who do 4 one-to-ones, get one half the number of referrals. So if you
Mm,
do 4 referrals a month, 4 one-to-ones a month, one a week, you will get 100% more referrals. And you give 100% more referrals. They are almost identical numbers. You give twice as much, you receive twice as much. So that's one of the things where that's the conditioning, that's the exercise. You got to get out and do one-to-ones. And as you stop doing them, your referrals dwindle.
yeah, that's interesting. One of the things that I did and I made a conscious effort of doing is, and this wasn't so much when I was in the leadership team, but when I was a member, I went to the leadership team and I said, hey, if anybody at any point ever, even if it's 2 or 3 minutes notice, cannot do their presentation in our meeting, you can always, without fail, call on me, even with a 60-second notice, and I will do a 10-minute presentation for the meeting. And it was amazing to me how many people were unwilling to talk about themselves. Do you experience that? Do you see that quite a bit?
Yeah, well, yes, I have. And I think one of the reasons are the fear of public speaking. There's a
Sure.
really good book written by a friend of mine, Andy Lapata, and the book title is great. The title is "And Death Came Third." And it was
Mm.
talking about the fears that people have in life. Public speaking was number 1. The fear of death in this survey was number 3.
What
And
was two?
so
Do you remember what two was?
I don't remember what 2 was. I got to
I'll have to
ask
look
it.
into that.
I got to go look at his book again because I forget what 2 is. But so people are sometimes just afraid to speak for 10 minutes. So here's what I teach people to do. And I learned it. I came up with it, but it was, I tested it with somebody. I had somebody who was an accountant and she didn't want to do her 10-minute talk. And she said, it takes all my power to do 20 seconds of my 1 minute presentation. I'm so afraid to do public speaking. So I said, look, you don't want to miss the opportunity to speak. And she said, well, if I got to speak, I quit. I'm like, well, don't quit.
Oh my
I said,
goodness.
okay, don't quit. Can you give a test? And she said, what? I said, give a test on tax law. Just ask 10 questions. You don't have to speak. Read the question. Have everyone take a vote. How many say true? Do true, false. How many say true? How many say false? Then give the answer. You do no speaking other than read. You read the material. She said, I can do that. And so she did it. And it was hysterical. By the third or fourth question, she's getting off script. She's talking extemporaneously. She actually went over time. She didn't realize that her 10 minutes was up. And so you just got to find ways to make it easier for people. And doing the test is a great way for a lot of professions to speak without really speaking.
That's a really good point. I'm trying to think about this outside of the context of BNI, because I realize everybody who's listening isn't going to join a BNI chapter. There might be some who maybe are on the fence, or maybe they've joined and they hear this and they think, maybe I should revisit that. But I think even outside of BNI, the problem that we have is a lot of the times, like you said, talking about ourselves, presenting, but even just having a good series of questions in an opportunity to network with somebody will take a lot of the pressure off to quote unquote perform. And I think that's where a lot of people get hung up.
Yeah, so I have a book called The 29% Solution. And
I've read it. It's been years, but I have read it.
Yeah, it's been around a long time. The subtitle is 52 Weekly Networking Success Strategies. In that book, I have a whole list of potential questions that you can ask somebody when you meet them for the first time. Just remember that it's, they're meant to be a discussion, not an interrogation. So,
Yes.
I've seen people who actually pulled out of their pocket their list of questions, and they're like,
is that right?
Hey, no, just memorize a few of them and let the dialogue go naturally. But that book has a list of questions that people can use. And by the way, it's called The 29% Solution because I probably should have gone with my first title. My original title was Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, and 6 Degrees of Separation. Because they're all an urban legend. The whole 6 degrees of separation is a fallacy. Even the study that it was done on by Milgram never said that people were separated by 6 degrees. It's a longer story, but only 29% of the participants in the study were in fact separated by 6 degrees. And that's why I used the term 29% solution.
And so when you talk about 6 degrees, is it a greater separation or a shorter separation than 6
Much
degrees?
greater, much greater. In some cases, they weren't. So 6 degrees of separation comes from a study done by Stanley Milgram in the 60s called the Small World Study. And this was before Google. And what he did was he said, here's a packet of material. He gave it to 60 some people in Oklahoma. And he said, get this packet to a guy, to a stockbroker in Massachusetts. So what happened is the person in Oklahoma just found somebody on the East Coast and they mailed it to him that they knew. And they said, could you get this to somebody who would know this guy? And then they mailed it to somebody in Massachusetts. And then somebody in Massachusetts mailed it to somebody in Boston. And then somebody in Boston found that guy. And on average, it took 6 steps to get there for the people who found him. The problem was 71% of the respondents never got the packet through.
So they didn't even make the first connection.
Well, they made the first one, but
somewhere in the process it broke down.
Yeah, it got lost in the process. It never made it to them. So only 29% of the respondents of the survey got it through. And so the thing was, he said it took 6 steps on average. And that's what the media picked up was 6 degrees of separation. And it's true, but only 29%. So what I talked about was, what's the difference between the 29% and the 71%? The difference is the 29% have built a powerful personal network. And here's how you do that. And that was the whole purpose of the book.
What's interesting is I've reached out to people that I want to have on the podcast. Even in my financial planning practice, what I found is that if I could have multiple angles to approach people, that was going to be significantly better than, let's say you knew somebody that I wanted an introduction to. the odds of me making a connection with that individual would be greatly enhanced if I knew 3 people, for example, that knew that same individual, and I had them approach that individual separately.
Around the same time. Yeah.
Right. It was an exponential increase in my ability to connect and reach out to that person. Because they might hear from you, Ivan, and think, okay, this Ryan guy, yeah, now he's on my radar. And then they hear from Steve, and he's talking about Ryan. And then Joe's talking about Ryan. He's like, yeah, I better connect with Ryan because these 3 guys now know him and have introduced me to him.
Well, you're right. 3 people, around the same period of time, mentioning it to someone is much more powerful. Or 1 person of great influence. So either 1 person who has great influence or a great relationship with that person, or 3 people. And I actually ran into this when I was working on my book, Masters of Networking. And I wanted Harvey Mackay to contribute a piece because he wrote the book, Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty, which was about networking. And I really wanted him. And I couldn't get past the secretary. I couldn't get past his assistant. She just wouldn't, it was just, and this was years ago.
Sure.
B&I was much smaller than it is now. And I couldn't get past the assistant. And so I just started asking people, and nobody really knew Harvey. And one day I was on a book tour, and I remember was driving me around, and he said, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And I said, "Yeah, I really would love to get through to Harvey Mackay. Do you know anyone who knows him? I know it's a long shot, but do you know anyone who knows him?" I said, "I can't get past his assistant." He said, "Oh, do you mean Carol? I know Carol really well." I'm like, "How do you know Carol?" I always say yes to drive authors because I get them in a car for an hour or so, and
Definitely.
I can ask them questions, and I can get their knowledge, and they're willing to talk because I'm giving them a ride. He said, so when Harvey came to town, somebody asked, is anyone willing to pick him up? And I volunteered. So I got to know Carol because I had to work with her on Harvey's arrival. And so I will call Carol and ask her to please take your call. And boom.
Immediately.
It went from no response at all to, hey, so-and-so said, you're a good guy, so what are you looking for? And I got Harvey to submit a piece in the book. And then I got to know Harvey really well. And
Sure.
He's a great guy, but it was the right person at the right time.
Well, not only was it that, definitely it was that, but it was also your willingness to bring it up.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I've had experiences with trying to secure guests for this podcast where, I've got a list. Like I know who I want to have on this podcast. And occasionally I'll mention this list and I'll tell people, like, here's the people that I really admire, that I respect, that I want to have on this show, that I think would add value to you. Does anybody know these individuals or have a connection? And I usually have between 20 to 30 people on that list. And without fail, every time I put that list out, I get 2 to 3, maybe 5 connections on a good day. Some of them will work out, some of them won't, but we start putting the pieces together. And that's what I enjoy about this is, like, how do you get the pieces put together? And there's that person, and this person knows that person, and that person knows this person. And it's kind of a game in a way for me. It's really interesting.
Well, I tell you what, when we're off air, let's talk about who you're looking for, and I'll see if I can get you a couple of good referrals.
Fair enough. And the offer stands the other way around too. So if there's somebody I can connect with, I'd be happy to do that. Yeah. So let's pivot and shift gears a little bit and talk about the structure that you have built over, I want to say, close to 40 years now?
Yeah. It's this is the 36th year for BNI.
36. What I noticed and what I enjoyed best about BNI was that there was the system, there was the structure. I know some people seem to get turned off with that, but to me, it was the system, it was the structure, it was the accountability that actually produced the results, other than just, hey, this loose kind of meeting where people know each other and they like each other, but they don't really know how to make connections. It was the structure that made it work so well.
Yeah, thank you. Before I started BNI, I went to a lot of networking groups, and I went to groups that were really mercenary, like we talked about.
Yeah.
And I felt like everyone was selling to me. And then I went to these groups that were totally social, and it was like a waste of time. And I didn't like either of those. What I wanted to do was take the business, but not make it mercenary, not transactional. I wanted it relational. And the social, but make it relational, and put them together, and the glue that would hold it together is our principal core value of giver's gain, helping people build their business. So I think the system is important. Hockey without rules would be boxing on ice. You got
Which could be fun, by the way. That actually could be kind of interesting. I'm not sure how much would get done, but it would be entertaining to watch.
Yeah, it'd be entertaining, but there wouldn't be any, MMA on ice. It wouldn't be, there wouldn't be much scoring. And so you got to have rules and systems and processes. And you're right, some people don't like it, but I'm all about results. I don't want to waste an hour and a half a week. You got to understand, when I started BNI, I didn't start it to create an organization. I started it because I needed referrals for my consulting practice. I was a management. So I started it because I wanted referrals, and I wanted to help my friends with referrals. And I wanted something that had accountability, but was also friendly. And so that's why we had the systems and processes as part of it. I didn't have time to just go meet. I have a friend who said, look, if I need another friend, I'd buy a dog. I don't need more friends. I need business associates.
Right.
And so I thought that was pretty appropriate.
It is. And that's not to say that you can't be friendly with these individuals,
right,
but it's not the basis of the actual meeting. And what I found is that individuals that I got to know over years of working closely with them, referring business to them referring business to me, is that, and you talk about this, the best thing about BNI is that you become friends. The worst thing about BNI is that you become friends, and that might undermine the purpose of the meeting.
Yeah, and so, friends don't like to hold friends accountable, and so that can sometimes be a challenge. But the chapters who really get it, they understand that friendships are important, but the accountability trumps it. It's accountability is even a little more important than the friendship, but you have to have both. It's not either or; it's both and. But the thing is, with BNI, it's not about creating friends; it's about creating referrals. And along the way, you create friendships, no question about it. I've met people who say I've created friends that'll last a lifetime in BNI, and that's true. I certainly have. I even met my wife in BNI.
Oh, is that right? She was a member?
Elizabeth was a member back in 1986, 1 year after I started BNI. We've now been married 31 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It was the best referral I ever got.
I bet. What was she in your chapter, or was she in a separate chapter?
She was in another chapter, and she attended a leadership team training that I did. And it's kind of funny. She kept hearing, oh, he's a great trainer. And she's like, oh, yeah, fine. And she went and she's like, oh, he's really good. And I saw her, and she was beautiful, is beautiful. And, but I was in a relationship, so I didn't connect with her again for about another 2 years. And when I connected with her again, she had reached out to me to ask if I could come to her chapter. She had now moved to a different state, and I was going to be in a part of the state that was several hours away. I was like, man, you don't just swing by that area. That's an overnight trip. And she said, I don't know if you remember me, but I remember thinking, oh yeah, I remember you very well. I didn't say that to her, but I remember.
Course, right.
And so I went and I did the presentation, and we just hit it off, and we started dating in '88 and got married in '89.
I'd say building BNI outside of everything else that you've done has been a worthy endeavor in that case.
Yeah, yes, indeed. And you'd be shocked how many BNI weddings there have been. I mean, I bet you hundreds.
I bet. I could definitely see how that would be the case. You meet people that, you spend every week with these individuals, right? And you get to learn about their business practices and who they are.
And it's like-minded. These are business people in a relational kind of professional relational kind of setting, but you get to know somebody a lot better than you would meeting at a bar.
Yeah, and look, there's nothing wrong with a bar. I don't know if I'd want to meet my wife at the bar necessarily. I guess it could work out, and there's probably some examples of people listening who that's worked out for. The problem is the intention, the motive is typically off. If you're looking for a wife and you're looking for her at the bar, the motive is typically off. And then what the hell do you talk about? It's awkward. It's uncomfortable. There's no direction. That leads me into what I wanted to ask you about or talk with you about is intentionality, right? And so I think what's so powerful about BNI, and I'm not trying to make this a sales pitch necessarily, but I just want to talk about one of the things that I think is so powerful is the intentionality. And what I see a lot of people go to with mixers and networking events is they do go with intention, but they go with the wrong intention.
Yes.
They go with the intention of what can this or these group of individuals do for me? And it's so counterintuitive to think that if I go with the intention of helping and adding value and serving as many people as possible, then things will work out well for me at some point down the road.
It is counterintuitive. It works best when you're meeting people that you get to build that professional relationship with. If you're going to just a mixer, the best use of a mixer is to gain visibility. Where look, I know people, it's like a sales spasm. They just have to sell. But I don't find that works very effectively. But even a blind squirrel will find a nut. So if you talk about what you do, you'll stumble over business. That will happen. But that shouldn't be the purpose of going to like business mixers at a chamber. And I love chambers. I recommend people join a chamber. But the purpose of those chamber mixers should be to make visibility so that in other contexts, you can then get to the credibility stage. And what BNI does is it creates that platform to get past visibility really quick and to start working on credibility really quick. And any good, we're talking about BNI, but any really good networking organization, it's about getting past visibility and getting to credibility as quickly as possible.
It's a good point, because what I've seen a lot of people do is and I'm glad you talk about the VCP framework. So the visibility, credibility, profitability, because what I see most people do when it comes to networking, and I think this is a blunder, is they'll skip V and C and go straight to P. Like they'll come to me, for example, because they know I've had Jocko Willink, for example, on the podcast. And they'll reach out to me. I have no idea who this individual is. We've never communicated in the past. They've never done anything for me to serve or help me or add value to my life. And it's like, hey, would you introduce me to Jocko?
Yeah, is that crazy?
I will not introduce you to Jocko. That is a relationship that I've gone through the VCP process with. Why would I just let you skip all of that?
So in one of my books, I call that premature solicitation, which you don't want to say fast 3 times.
Yes, I bet not.
And what I do is I actually send a link, and I get this all the time. People are always asking me to introduce them to somebody.
I bet.
And if I don't know them, I send them a link to the VCP process. So I actually, one of my articles, I'll say, look, you got to read this before you ask me for something. And I send it to them, and then they disappear because they don't want to build a relationship. They just want to. Networking is more about farming than it is about hunting. It's about cultivating relationships. And so they're just hunting. They're not cultivating relationships.
How do you find out what, and this is something I talk a lot about with men, and again, whether it's BNI or trying to go to their business or make some other connections for some other endeavor they have, how do you go about finding what other people need and want, and how you specifically can add value to that person's life so that you can start building up some credibility and move through this stage?
Well, that's where I think one-to-ones really come in handy, because you can do a deeper dive with the person to find out more about who they are and what they do. So in a lot of my books, Networking Like a Pro, the 2nd edition, anyone that or you could just go to my blog, ivanmisner.com, and type in GAINS, gains. And you'll see what the gains exchange is. That's part of doing a one-to-one. What you do is I share my goals with you, you share your goals with me. I share you my accomplishments, interests, networks, and skills. And you do the same with me, one at a time. And the idea is to find overlapping areas of interest. And whenever you can find an overlapping area of interest with someone, that's a linkage point to create a relationship. First time I tested this, I tested it in a BNI group, and there were 2 men who knew each other. They'd both been in the chapter for a little under a year, but they had never referred each other, really didn't have much of a relationship in the chapter. And I asked them to do the exercise. And they raised their hand. I went on over, and they said, we don't want to do this. I said, why? They said, because this is what they said. They said, because it's weenie. I said, it's weenie? What do you mean it's weenie? It's silly. Who Who cares about this stuff? I said, okay, do me a favor, just do it. And I'm going to give you a form and at the end to give a review. And when you do the review, if you don't think it was worthwhile, say, hey, it was weenie and it was a waste of my time.
Sure.
So they said, oh, okay, fair enough. So they did it. Here's the funny thing, Ryan, they didn't get past interests. When they got to interests, they found out they were both soccer coaches for their sons' soccer teams. Okay, forget everything else. The rest of the conversation was, what are your coaching techniques? What do you do with this? How do you handle that? Who do you have scout for you? You know what? I'm willing to scout for you if you'll scout for me and take videos. All of a sudden, these guys made this connection. They'd known each other for a year. They'd never done business. Within 2 months, they had both referred business to each other. Why? Because they built a relationship with each other. And they did it by using the gains exchange and one-to-one. It's about finding overlapping areas of interest. And by the way, the review was great. They said, this is a great exercise.
This actually works. Yeah, I mean, 36 years of refining it, it should work at this point. 9,600 members. Chapters. How many members roughly do you guys have?
About 270,000 members in a little over 70 countries.
Yeah, so this isn't stuff that's like, it might work. No, this has been proven. It works. You've got almost 300,000 people doing this on a weekly basis. It works. I can actually, excuse me, weekly, yes. I can relate to what those guys were thinking because of my personality. My personality is bottom line. So I'm like, hey, we're all here at BNI. We all know what we're trying to do. I'm trying to get business. You're trying to get business. Let's just help each other and let's just get right to it.
Right.
My personality lends itself to that mentality. I've had to work on that, obviously, because it doesn't work, right? It doesn't work.
As did I.
What I have found, and maybe help me round some of this thought process out, is that the characteristic of curiosity has genuinely improved and enhanced my ability to have these types of conversations, not feel so rushed to get to the bottom line, because I'm just curious. I want to know what makes you tick. I want to know why you started BNI. The more I'm curious about an individual I'm talking with, the less I am to be driven to bottom line, give me a referral, or I have to give you a referral. And that actually undermines everything you're trying to do.
You're absolutely right. I think that's a great way of looking at it and a great way of describing it, curiosity. We found one of the books I did is called Business, Networking, and Sex, Not What You Think. That's the subtitle, Not What You Think. And it's about the difference between men and women and how they network.
Sure.
And interestingly enough, we found, and we surveyed 12,000 people. That's the survey I was talking about earlier. We surveyed 12,000 people, and we found that men were more likely than women to be transactional in the way they network. Women were more likely to be, than men, were more likely to be relational in the way they network.
Sure.
And so what was interesting was women actually did better in networking than men did. And so we said, okay, that's interesting. The one difference is relational transactional. So then we just looked at men and women together who were relational versus transactional, who did better. And the people who were relational, who went into it with curiosity, who went into it to build a professional relationship, did much better than the people who did a transactional. Now, men are clueless on this one. There's well, what's that look like? So what it looks like is what you said, curiosity. Here's an example. So many women said to me, and this was a shock to me, men introduce themselves like a resume.
Right. List of accomplishments, list of things you've done. Sure.
Right. Yeah. And so, I'm the senior vice president of marketing for whatever company, and it sounds like a resume. Women tend to be a little more relational in the way they introduce themselves. And so I had to ask one of my co-authors, Hazel, what's that look like? To explain that to me. And so she did, and I started looking for it. I'll never forget the first time I'm in a room. I got a man and a woman and myself, and we're talking, and the second woman walks up. And the second woman joins our little group, and the first woman says, "Hi, my name's so-and-so." Not, what does she do or what do you do? She said, "How did you hear about tonight's event?" And the woman said, "Oh, my friend Alice invited me to the event." And the first woman says, "Oh my goodness, you know Alice? I know Alice too. How do you know Alice? Now I look over at the guy, and the guy, his eyes are rolling behind his head. And he's like, kill me now. Who cares about Alice? I'm here to do business. And I'm thinking, that's relational.
Right.
He's focused on transactional. I could see him going, I don't know Alice. Who cares about Alice? But yet they were making a connection. And so it's that curiosity that you described. And I think that's a great way of putting it. It makes all the difference. You got to be interested, not just interesting.
I actually see this in a lot of presenters. A presenter will get up, they've got 45 minutes or whatever it may be, and they'll spend the first 15 minutes talking about themselves. I'm like, I can appreciate that. Nobody cares. Like, just get to we know you're here. We bought a ticket for this thing. So we trust whoever put this thing together. They're going to bring in the right speakers. So why don't you just get to it? And then throughout the 45 minutes, we'll decide if you're credible or not. But let's get to it. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about your message, not your list of credentials.
100% right. Now, sometimes being a keynote speaker, sometimes I have organizations that say, could you spend the first 5 minutes just talking about yourself? And I say no. I say, no, I'm not going to. Here's my introduction. Read this.
Read this. Yeah. You do that for me.
Yeah, because it sounds way better you talking about me than me talking about me.
Yes.
And you can say things about me that just sound like I'm bragging if I say it myself. And so I never talk about myself. Or if I just find myself in a position where I have to, it's just so brief. I run an organization called BNI. We got groups all over the world. Today I'm going to be talking about, and then I launch off. I make them do the intro because it's the third-party testimonial, which is what makes referrals work.
Yeah.
When somebody talks about themselves, it's different than if somebody's talking about you positively.
Well, and I also think it's just a level of respect you have for the people you're communicating with, whether that's on a one-to-one basis or in an audience of 1,000 people, like you were talking about earlier. I care enough about you to talk about things that will serve you, not about propping myself up. And I think that expedites the credibility component of this.
Yeah, if you can show that you're truly an expert by what you're teaching, you don't need all the credentials. You certainly don't need to talk about your own credentials.
Yeah. I wrote a couple things down in anticipation of our discussion, and one of the things that I wrote down is expectations. It's interesting because there's a bit of a dichotomy that you have with BNI, and I'm sure with other networking organizations that you track these things. You guys are very, very good at tracking. Here's the referrals given. Here's the referrals received. Here's how much revenue that's generated. So you're very good at that. But I also think you need to be very careful of quote unquote keeping score, because those expectations with other individuals undermine, I think, the VCP process you're talking about.
Yeah, you got to have a balance. It's important to have a balance, but you got to track the numbers. You can't hit a target you're not aiming at.
Right.
So you got to have the target. But one of the ways we do it is that we don't say who got the business. So that's why we have thank you for closed business. So it's just a number that's generated by the chapter, but it's not like I made $500,000 in business this year. So none of the money is pointed at to the person who got it.
Sure. Right.
So what happens is if you give me a referral that's worth $5,000, you say this referral, or I would say it's from you and it's worth $500,000 or $5,000.
Thank you to Ryan for the $5,000 referral.
$5,000 in business. So sure. I'm recognizing it, but I'm not putting my name on it. It's all anonymous. So you'll get the thank you, and I may publicly stand up and say it, but in terms of the numbers tracked, as you described, that part's anonymous, unless I say something publicly. So it's kind of, we tried to balance those two issues of, accountability and tracking numbers with not just bragging and not trying to force bigger numbers in the system.
Well, I think no doubt. Well, I think there's a lesson there too of, making sure that you follow through and you thank the individual. They went out of their way. There was a risk. Let's take an example. I refer you to the $5,000 referral, whatever that looks like. That's a risk for me. That's not a risk for you. It's
No.
a risk for me to introduce my friends to you with the
Yeah,
anticipation, expectation that you're going to treat them right and you're going to treat them
right.
fairly. That's my risk I'm shouldering. So I should be acknowledged for that at a minimum. Hey, Brian, thank you for trusting me with your friends.
Yeah, you hit it the nail on the head. When you give a referral, you give a little of your reputation away. If you give a good referral, it enhances your reputation. If you give a bad referral, it hurts your reputation. That's the reason why you wouldn't give the names of the people that you've done interviews with to the person who is asking, because you don't
Right.
want to ruin your reputation by starting to refer people who you don't know.
Yeah, there's no way for me to know how this person's going to be treated.
That's professional suicide.
What are some tips or some strategies, maybe one or two, maybe three tops that you have for somebody who, they recognize, hey, I need to build a referral system. I know that I need to connect with other individuals. What are some strategic steps that they can take outside of maybe joining a BNI chapter? I think we can check that one off the list. That
Yeah,
they can
well, go to
take to,
bni.com if you have any
right,
interest.
exactly. If you're interested, go do it. But outside of that, what would you suggest?
So I think the first, I'll give you two things, and the second one has three steps.
Okay.
The first is diversify your networks. So you got to participate in something like a chamber of commerce. And by the way, it's always surprises people to hear the founder of BNI say, join other networks. But the truth is, if you want to build a powerful personal network, you should belong to a chamber of commerce. You should belong to something like a service club, like Rotary, Lions, Kiwanis. You should do community service because you meet movers and shakers on community service projects. And you should belong to a group like BNI, where it's one person per profession, they get together every week. So participate in, diversify the kinds of networks that you're in. I talk about that in Networking Like a Pro. You can also find that on ivanmisner.com. The second thing is, so when you're going to these meetings, particularly ones that are not BNI, because BNI's got a system and structure, what a lot of people say to me is, how do I follow up? How do I follow up? I meet these people at a networking event. So I talk about this in the second edition of Networking Like a Pro. It's called the 24/7/30 follow-up system.
Okay.
24/7/30. Within 24 hours after meeting somebody, send them an email or a handwritten note. Nobody sends handwritten notes anymore. Send them a handwritten note, or use, I don't know if you're familiar with send-out cards. I love
Yeah.
send-out cards. I'm a customer. I'm not a rep. I don't represent send-out cards, but I'm a customer. I like their program a lot. You can do it all online. My handwriting sucks. It's really bad. So a handwritten card, it doesn't look good. But
They'd get it, but they wouldn't be able to read it, right? So, like, what's the
yeah,
point?
that's it. Or I'll write. I've been known to write a card, make a spelling mistake or something, and then I have to throw it out. But with send-out cards, you can do it all online. It could look in. You could do it in your own hand printing, which is a great service. Anyway, send them a thank you. Hey, Ryan, it was really nice meeting you at the such and such networking organization. I enjoyed our conversation on X. Do that and don't sell to them. Okay, hold yourself back. Don't sell to them. Within 7 days, connect with them on social media. And here's what's really important: is you want to connect where they are, not where you are. And I learned this from my kids, actually. I learned this from my kids because I tried when they were young. My eldest is 33. My youngest is now 27. But when they were teenagers, I would try to reach my eldest daughter, and I'd call her and she wouldn't answer. But if I texted her, boom, she'd respond. And I'm like, honey, this thing's a telephone. You can actually talk in it. And, yeah, Dad, I know. So
right, you're not going to convince her to do it your way, so you might as well do it her way, right?
So I learned to text her. So then my second daughter, if I called her nothing, if I texted her nothing, I couldn't get through to her. So I said to my wife, what do I do? She said, now this is 10 years ago. She said, well, you got to WhatsApp her. I said, well, what's WhatsApp? I don't know what that is. So I downloaded WhatsApp just so I could talk to my daughter. So, because if I WhatsApped her, boom, she'd respond. Then came my son. He, call him nothing, text him nothing. He didn't like WhatsApp. He was a gamer. Now, this one I figured out on my own. He was on Steam, which is an online platform. So I was in my 50s. I downloaded Steam and I bought a game so that I could instant message my son, and he'd respond like that.
Really? You got him like that? That's funny.
Like, he would respond immediately. Even if I called him or whatever, he wouldn't, but if I instant message him, he responded. So I tell you that story because if you want to connect with people, go where they are, not where you are. So maybe they like WhatsApp. Well, if you want to really build your business, maybe you ought to join WhatsApp or
Yeah.
LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter. And so find out when you're having a conversation with them, say, I'm pretty active on Facebook. What platform do you tend to use the most? And once
Mm-hmm.
they tell you, then, when you walk away, write down on the back of their card, unless you're in Asia, never write on somebody's card in Asia. That's bad form. But in the United States,
That's a taboo thing for them, huh?
taboo, yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
And
I didn't know
if
that.
you ask for permission, they'll give it to you and say, "Oh, Americans, they don't know." Uh,
Interesting.
yeah, don't even ask. Just don't do it. Have a notepad. And it's in most Asia, China, Japan. I don't think it's a problem in India, but China, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong don't write on their cards.
That's interesting.
So it's about respect for their.
Sure. I can see where it's coming from. It's just kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah. So another cultural thing you learn by making mistakes.
The hard way. Yeah, you learn the hard way. What happened when you did that for the first time? Did they just give you a weird look? Or?
No, the person was very polite, said nothing, said yes. And then as soon as that person walked away, the person who was with me, kind of my handler, just leaned over to me and said, just so you know, don't ask if you can write on their cards because it's impolite. And I hope you don't mind me telling you. I'm like, no, I'm glad.
No, I need to know that. I want to know that now.
Asking everybody.
You should have told me that, 30 seconds ago.
Well, again, it was about politeness.
Right.
He didn't want to interrupt me and correct me in front of somebody.
Yeah.
So I just learned carry a notepad with me and write notes when I'm there. So anyway, when you're talking to them, then write down on a notepad or on their card. They like LinkedIn or they like Facebook. So then within 7 days, connect with them there. Hey, we met at the chamber mixer, dropped your card. I love this post that you did. And don't sell to them. Don't instant message sell to them. Last 24/7/30. Within 30 days, reach out to them, set up a time to meet in person or by Zoom these days to do a one-to-one, like I've been talking about.
Right.
And just say, hey, look, I want to get to know your business a little bit better. This is strictly a networking call. Hopefully you'll learn a little bit about my business. I'd like to learn about who you are and what you do. Maybe we can get together and I'd like for you just to tell me about what your professional goals are. What are some of the things you've done? Throwing the gains exchange at a stranger, they're like, well, but just saying, I'd like to know more about your goals, about some of the things you've done. What are some of your interests? That kind of thing. It's the same thing. You just don't have a form.
Right.
And then do the gains exchange or do the one-to-one and don't sell to them because you're just getting barely to credibility. It's too early to ask for business, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that, it's interesting because it's counterintuitive. And the less that I sell my services or myself, the better off all of these relationships are. And frankly, the more profitable they are. It just takes a little bit longer. Like you can go for that quick hit, and you might get it, but at what cost?
At what cost? And will you get referrals from that? Oftentimes clients don't refer people for their services unless they've been asked to. And you've got to have a really good relationship at that point. I find that some of the best people to get referrals from are the people that I have a strategic alliance with, where I refer them, they refer me. And so what you're doing is trying to, with networking, particularly in a networking group like BNI, you're not trying to make a sale, you're trying to train a sales force. You're trying to teach people how to refer your business because you'll do that for them and they'll do it for you.
Yeah, that's a good distinction because I think a lot of people, and this was my experience anyways, and you could probably attest to this, is they would join BNI because they saw 30 people they could potentially sell to. Like, no. Like business is going to conduct itself. Definitely. It's going to happen. Don't worry about that. But this is your sales force. You need to train them. You wouldn't sell your services to an employee on their first day at the job. You would train them how to go out and sell your services.
Right. If they're looking at the room for 30 people, they're thinking too small. Because what they have to do is take a look at how many people do they have contacts with. So the average person has 150 connections. I'm not, Facebook has redefined what a friend is. So taking Facebook out of it,
Real connection.
it's called the Dunbar number, the number of people that you really know. And its average is 150. So if you have those 30, what you're really looking at is 30 times 150.
Mm-hmm.
That's who's sitting in the room. Thousands and thousands of people are sitting in the room with those 30. And what you want is access to those 150 that each person knows. But you're only going to get access when you do what you said, and that is act curious, build the relationship, move through VCP. When you get to credibility, then you have access to that other 150 people that are sitting in that room.
Yeah, the other thing I think it does is that it makes you different. And kind of, because when you go to a networking event, you know that everybody there is trying to sell each other and is trying to convince each other why they're the best, why their products are this and that. All that. You know that. So you come up with a plan. I mean, you go to an event. Well, I do. If I ever go to a networking event, I'm like, put up a wall because these people are going to try to hound you and bombard you.
Yeah.
If you go to that with a different mentality, which is, okay, I'm going to try to serve as many people as possible. That's it. I'm just going to try to serve as many people as possible in a way they feel is valuable. Instantaneously, you set yourself up for success because you're so much different than what everybody else is and what everybody else is doing.
100% different. 100% different. And at 30, I just did the math on it. You got 4,500 connections in the room.
Right.
With those 30 people. And so sometimes, there are people who don't understand this philosophy of giver's gain. And they say, well, surely you got to ask for business. Well, yeah, you teach people how to refer you, what to listen for. And so every now and then someone will say, but what happens if someone takes advantage of you? I'm not suggesting that you be taken advantage of. And so one of the things I say is that if you're giving referrals to people and you're not getting them in return, what you do is you sit down with them and you get a list of all the referrals you've ever given them. And you say, hey, I'd like, I want to do this one-to-one. I wanted to talk about the referrals that I've given you, how they worked out. So, a year ago I gave you this one. How's that played out? How's this one played out? How's this one played out? And you just talk about all the referrals you've given them. You may be surprised that those referrals all sucked and you didn't know it.
Yeah.
In which case they're not taking advantage of you. You've given them bad referrals.
Right.
Okay. That's information you need. In many cases, some of those will have in fact worked out. So then what you do is rather than guilt them, you guilt them subtly. Rather than get upset with them, you say, I'm really glad that 3 of those 4 referrals turned out for you. I would appreciate if we could talk a little bit today about how you might be able to reciprocate and give me some. There's nothing wrong with doing that. When you've given and haven't gotten anything, to say, how can we work together? How can I help you to maybe get referrals passed to me? There's nothing wrong with that if you do it tactfully and professionally.
I mean, that's just a mature way to approach it.
Giver does not mean being an infinite giver does not mean you're an infinite victim. There's a difference.
Yeah. Do you think, is that common? I mean, I don't know that. I'm trying to think back about my experience. I can't really think of anybody right offhand where it was like evident that I had given them significantly more than they'd given me in return. People want to reciprocate, I think.
Yeah, you're right. It's not common, but there are people, particularly people, I get the question most by new members or people who are thinking about joining. It's like, what if you got this new age philosophy of giver's gain. First of all, it's not new age. There's actual science behind giving and gratitude for giving. So they don't quite get the power of it, and so they want to know, well, what if I give and I don't get anything? And so I walk them through that. And that makes more sense to them.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, new members, people considering joining, they haven't fully seen it in action. I mean. Yeah, you want to help people. Everybody who joins and sticks around for any amount of time understands I want to serve these people. I want these people to win. These are my friends. These are my business colleagues, and I want these people to thrive and win. The more they do, the more I realize I have a greater likelihood of success as well.
Exactly. That's what networking should be about, and that's why you should never. Networking should never make you feel sleazy. It should never make you feel bad. You should love networking because it's all about building relationships if you do it right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if people to read your books, if they're so inclined, join BNI. Obviously, listen to the principles we're talking about in this podcast. That will wash away a lot of that sleaziness feeling that maybe some people have had in the past. And
Yeah.
I found that I enjoy it. I like it. I like meeting people. I like seeing what they're all about. I meet creative people and interesting people, and it's fun to make connections. Like I have this friend, and now I have this friend, and I can make them friends. Like that to me is always really fun. I enjoy that process.
Yeah, being a connector is an important part of networking, building your network. If you're able to put people together regularly, then that's sort of advanced level networking. That's really very powerful.
Well, and it's a skill set that anybody can have, really.
Yes.
Like some of us are more gifted speakers, some of us are obviously more intelligent than others. We're all born with a different level of skill sets, but anybody can be a connector. Like
Yes.
I can connect you, Ivan, with this individual you need a connection with. Like I look like a hero, and I didn't have to do anything. I don't have to be intelligent. I don't have to spend any of my resources except for the 5 minutes to craft the text or the email,
Exactly.
and I win. You win, he wins, I win. It's awesome.
And then you have two people that you've just stepped up a notch on credibility
Yes,
because one person you referred and the other person you helped out.
right.
And so it's one notch level higher on credibility for both.
Ivan, I want to be respectful of your time, but there's one other thing I wanted to mention because this is something that happens a lot. Is you talk about uh, making completing the triangle, if I remember correctly, right? So what I see some people will do is they'll fail to complete the triangle or give people advance notice. And what happens in my instance quite a bit is somebody might introduce me to somebody without any warning for me or the individual they're trying to introduce. And I'm like, whoa, you just did that individual a disservice because maybe they didn't want to be connected with me. And
Right.
you just did me a disservice because maybe I don't want to be connected with that person.
Or maybe you
Make
can't provide a product or service to help that person.
right. So you talk about making sure that you make those connections first,
Yeah.
and then you complete the triangle. I'm trying, if that's right. That might be off a little bit, but that's what I remember.
That's not quite the phraseology I use, but I like it. That's good. So you do have to make sure that the other two parties are connected to you, no question about it. So if you're just saying, hey, I know somebody that needs your product, that's not even a referral, that's a lead.
Mm,
You have to talk to that somebody, and that somebody has to say, yeah, I could really use this. Do you know somebody? Yes, I do. Can I refer them to you? Can I introduce them to you? And when they say yes, then you reach out to the first person and you say, or to the person you're referring to. You say, hey, let me introduce you to so and so. They've asked me to connect the two of you, and you make that personal introduction. Do it by email, do it by phone. Really want to go ahead, far ahead, advance. Do it in person after
mm,
COVID, of course.
sure.
But you take them to meet the person. That's really going out of your way. And for your best referral partners, that's the kind of thing you do.
Yeah, it's an investment in them. It's an investment in yourself.
Yeah.
It's a good practice. Well, hey, I got to tell you, I appreciate you. I have been looking forward to this conversation. I've been familiar with you for 12 years, 14 years, somewhere in there now, and it's a real treat to talk with you. You have been indirectly responsible for hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue and countless connections in my life because of BNI and what you've created and the principles you've shared and the books that I've read. So, like I said, just an honor to be able to talk with you and have you impart some of your wisdom with us today.
Well, I appreciate those kind words very much, and I love what I do. It's a fun business to be in, and it's a great business to help make a difference for people. Let me leave you with one last thought. You know the expression, "It's not what you know, it's who you know."
Yes.
I don't think it's either one. I think it's how well you know each other that counts. It's not just who I know, but it's how well I know them to
Mm.
be able to connect with you that really makes a difference. Can I pick up the phone and would they take my call? And if they take my call, if I ask them for a favor, would they be willing to do it?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just who you know, it's how well you know each other that really, really makes a difference in building a powerful personal network.
Great distinction. Where do you want people to go to connect and learn more about what you're doing, Ivan?
So obviously bni.com, if you have any interest in finding out information, right now they're all online, so you're COVID safe. And then for my blog, it's ivanmisner.com, and tons. I've been blogging twice a week since 2007. So there's tons of content up there free.
Great. Well, thanks again. Appreciate you. Thanks for imparting some of that wisdom with us.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me on.